Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to our webinar this morning. My name is Mike Thorne from Utilmate. What we're covering today is what is a compliant electricity invoice in the Australian market. So let me just share that with you. Okay, so what we've got is a bit of just the presentation here, just showing you what is compliant. Okay, what we mean by compliant is we're looking at these laws particularly. So in the Australian market, you've got the AEMC, who dictates the laws in New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, Tas and the ACT, and they've got the National Energy Retail Rules. Victoria is slightly different in that they've got their Energy Retail Code, and then you've got the Australian Energy Regulator, who basically manages the licensing and the reporting of all retailers. Broadly, you are either an authorised retailer in Australia or an exempt retailer. To sell electricity in Australia, you have to be one of the two. There are no exceptions. Within the exemptions, there are deemed registrable and individual exemptions. So the deemed ones are where you don't actually have to apply for anything. You're deemed to have an exemption, but broadly, you have to have one of those three things. We're going to talk about those. For a compliant invoice, regardless of what state you're in, whether you're one of those different categories, they are broadly the same. There are very small differences in certain areas, but we'll speak generally about them, and broadly the rules about what you have to do to produce a compliant invoice are the same. So the key aspects for a compliant electricity invoice is you've got to show a lot of the utility information, be it the meter number, meter reads, next scheduled read dates, and supply address. So you've got to have all that nice and clear. You've got to show the billing period that you're billing the customer for, the invoice date, and the due date, which is all fairly obvious stuff. Now, the energy consumption benchmarks, so that only applies to authorised retailers, but you basically have to benchmark your customers' usage against that of other customers in your postcode. So the government produces some stats, some information around those benchmarking numbers, and depending on the number of people in your house, you have to show them where they sit in comparison to them. If you are doing security deposits, which a number of our customers do, are a good way of, particularly if you've got lots of tenants or people moving in and out of buildings and apartments, security deposits are a good way to go. But if you do hold them, one, you have to show them, and you also have to apply interest on them as well if you are holding them. The other thing is your payment channels. So you have to have all of the following available to customers. So you have to have an in-person payment channel, you have to have a telephone option, a mail option, direct debit is only for authorised retailers, and an optional one, and then an electronic funds transfer. So those are the requirements around the payment channels you have to make available, and just in general it is a good idea to have as many payment channels available as possible because you want to get paid, of course. The most important thing. Now you must reference the availability of energy, charge rebates, concession schemes, relief schemes. So they're all different by different states, so there are different variants of them, but you have to explain to customers that they are available to them, what they need to do to go and get them. You must show a 24-hour telephone number for faults and emergencies, and normally that is the name of the number and the name of the distributor. So you must say this is Ausgrid, this is their number, or this is City Power, this is their number, whatever it might be. So you have to show that on the bill. You must show the tariffs and the basis on which they are calculated. In most states, particularly Victoria, New South Wales, you have to show them as GST inclusive, so they don't get into the practice of what they're trying to do is get customers to have a clear picture of what they're getting charged. So they want everyone to have GST inclusive rates, so that if everyone's got the same thing on their bills, it's easy for customers to compare their rates. Now you must show the average daily consumption of this customer, and also the consumption and the average daily consumption for the same time last year, if you're an authorised retailer. So that's a requirement just for them. If you're exempt, you don't have to do those things, but just in general as a customer service practice, it's not that hard to do, and it is a good practice for your customers to show that information. You must clearly show if the invoice is based on an estimate or actual reading, and you also must provide instructions for your customers how to lodge a customer read with you. So you have to provide instructions around that. You must also provide instructions how to lodge a complaint or dispute and how to escalate that complaint to the state ombudsman if the customer so chooses. And the last thing here is you must provide contact details of interpreter services for the different community languages. So this is our Zappy is a demonstration brand of ours. So this is our template invoice, which is a compliant invoice. We've had it audited by a company called Compliance Quarter, which does a lot of licensing and legal work in the utility space. So we've had this audited as a compliant invoice. So the key things you'll see here is, we've got some of these things we talked about, or all these things we talked about. So we have a faults and emergency number sitting here. We have an invoice due date, invoice date. We've got a bill period displayed and the payment channels and the payment options. Okay, so that's on the front page, and then this is the back page of the bill, and you'll see here we've got estimate actual, so we're displaying clearly which one it is. We're showing all the meter reads, so the meter number, the meter reads. We're showing the site identifier, which is not required, but in the future it may be if they get their way with sort of producing NEMIs within the embedded networks and that sort of thing. So we're displaying that, obviously the supply address, so that's all, and also the net scheduled read date here. We're showing all the tariffs. These are the applicable tariffs and the calculations. So we're showing the rates, exact rates, kilowatt hours, days, etc. for the periods, and also the amounts. We're showing the average daily consumption. So we've got a graph here showing for each month your usage, and then in the little bit down here you can see we've got the average daily usage, the supply this period last year, this period, and the average daily cost. So we're showing those things to customers. This is the benchmarking stuff we talked about. So if you're an authorized retailer, you've got to show the averages, for your postcode based on the number of people, and then you display their average so they can see where they sit in comparison to this. And then we've got the interpreter services message that we talked about here. So you can say, hey, look, if you need an interpreter service in different languages, this is the number to call. And then all these other messages are around government, social programs, rebates, life support, things like that give the customer all that information they need. So that's an example of a compliant invoice. Just some of the other things to watch out for or be aware of as an entity selling electricity in Australia. If a customer requests you to provide historical meter and billing data for the previous 2 years, you have to provide that on request. So you need an easy process for doing that, of course. Explicit informed consent is a big ticket item these days. So when you're signing up a new customer or someone's moving into one of your properties, you have to be very clear about your terms and conditions and that they've explicitly agreed to them. And the key thing around that is not hiding sort of prices and other important aspects away in the terms or making it hard to access. You have to make that very clear and upfront for a customer to read and identify. You must identify customers that are unable to pay and offer payment plans for their arrears. So that's obviously payment plans and hardship customers. And around the managing of that, you have to provide them notices, confirming what the arrangement is, reminder notices, cancellation notices. So that's a very important aspect as well. Disconnection of customers. You obviously, if it gets to that point, and there was a lot of pressure on some sectors and customers during the COVID lockdowns and that sort of thing that have occurred this year. But essentially, you must not disconnect a customer unless you have ticked the boxes, which is seeing them reminder notices, trying them by phone, giving them advice around concessions, rebate schemes, etc. that they can apply for, and obviously send them final disconnection notices. So unless you've ticked these boxes, you can't disconnect people, and that's a key area where retailers can get fined and get in trouble is around disconnections, because it is such a important step to take, or last resort sort of step to take. Same thing around planned and unplanned outages. So you've got to inform customer of those, particularly unplanned outages. You've got to tell them within 30 minutes of it occurring, or you being aware of it occurring. If you've got life support customers within your buildings, then obviously that becomes another degree of importance, and there's processes and rules around what you need to do there. With all this stuff, I mean, probably the most important thing, or the last thing around all this, is being able to prove that you've met the requirements. So it's probably all very well being able to do all these things, but being able to prove that you did it in the event of a complaint or an audit is probably the most important thing to do in this area. The other thing just to show you here, just bear with me 1 moment. Yeah. Okay, so you should see the screen here. So this is into our system here. So what we're looking at here is firstly the invoices themselves. So that invoice you just saw in the presentation. As a customer, we've got Bumblebee Man here as our customer, but he rings up, got an inquiry about his invoice or whatever, we can access that same invoice, and you might be able to see it a bit better in here. So that's essentially that same invoice we were looking at with all the compliant information there. We're able to send reminder notices, manage payment plans. So if we've got payment plan sitting here, we can create payment plans for hardship customers. We can identify them as hardship or not. Here we go. So we can say, is this customer experiencing difficulties or hardship? Yes, they are. Therefore, we'll put them on a payment plan. Does it cover their arrears or their usage while they're on the payment plan? So we go through and do all that stuff. And again, the important thing is, you're managing it as far as, the customer's expectations and trying to get the customer out of trouble and paying you and that sort of thing. But also, where all this stuff is auditable and retrievable. So in the event you get audited or a complaint, you've got all the information here that you did actually do all these things. So that's just briefly our system. So it's available for doing that sort of stuff. The what else works well that we've seen, so we've got just 4 minutes left. This is just a 15-minute little brief introduction here, is other things that our customers do that we see that works really well is very clear and simple email and SMS messages. So the reality is Ultra is a pretty low engagement, pretty low interest sort of an area for most people. They don't even, you see them in email, they don't probably even open the PDF, open the actual invoice. They just want to know how much it is and how to pay it, sort of thing. So what we find is putting most of that content in the actual email itself is the most beneficial. So here's an example here of our Zappy brand again. You can see here it's got all the invoice details, amounts to pay, a pay now button which goes through to a payment site. What you'll see is in our system here, we're integrated with a bunch, oops, sorry, wrong one. We're integrated with a bunch of payment channels that you're probably familiar with in the industry. Companies like Easy Debit, StrataPay, Stripe, Forte, that's just some of the channels there, but you can basically very simply set up an account with them, have some payment channels for credit card payment online, direct debits, all that kind of stuff, and it's straight through to our system, so that works really well. But essentially, customer wants to know how much do I owe and how do I pay, and that's sort of the stuff you want to make available to them very easily. The other bit here is prompt payment discounts or late payment penalties. So they are both able to do both of them as a retailer, and they're obviously a good way of getting paid on time. There's obviously an incentive there for customers if you make that available. The last thing there is our direct debit payment channel. So it's by far the most preferred payment mechanism for retailers. Being able to take the money rather than waiting for it is a big advantage, and it's not that hard to set up. It's just if you're a small entity, sometimes it's a bit tricky with the banks doing a DD facility. So there's a bunch of payment gateway providers in the middle that sort of support some of that stuff. And the last thing here is around my account portals. So you want to avoid customers having to contact you all the time. You don't want to be going through that. So we have a My Account portal here where you can sign in as a customer, do things like move in, move out, pay your bill, see your usage. So it ticks a lot of those boxes from a compliance point of view around what you can see as well, as far as being able to retrieve your usage and that sort of thing for those customers that are at that level of interest. Okay, so that's sort of that's 14 minutes in here. I'll just switch back to this. Okay, so I suppose, has anyone got any questions out there that that you'd like to ask? Okay, I got one coming in here. All right, so he's got a question around the DFO, or the default offer. So what that is in the New South Wales market, it's basically the benchmark price or the default offer. It's only really important if you are offering, if you're saying percentages off if you're offering discounted percentages. So you can set your tariffs to whatever you want up to that default offer, but it's only where you're saying I've got 22% off, it has to be off that default offer. It can't be some other benchmark rate. That's sort of the importance of that one. So it's not common in the embedded networks that we've seen that do sort of the guaranteed or discount off so much these days. Most people just set tariffs, set the rates, but that the system's able to do that, and it is an option as well. So thank you for that question. Commercial tenants is a question. Yes, so we do. You're obviously looking at a residential case there, and the compliance requirements for residential is a lot higher than commercial, a lot more protections. But essentially, yes, we do unbundled invoicing with demand, network rates separated from retail rates, all that kind of stuff. So yes, it does, is the answer there. Yeah. Great. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I think you've got all our contact details. So if that is of interest and you'd like to hear more or have more of a detailed chat with us, then you know where to find us, and it'll be great to hear from you. Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks for attending.